Here is Dahlia's belongings. 9 days after 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was found murdered, this note arrived at a Los Angeles newspaper. The killer wasn't just hiding, they were taunting everyone. The package contained her personal documents, all wiped clean of fingerprints with gasoline. It was a dead end in a case that would become Hollywood's most haunting unsolved mystery, and a tragic symbol of a life erased. January 15th, 1947, Leimert Park, Los Angeles. A quiet, developing suburban neighborhood. A local mother, Betty Bersinger, was walking with her 3-year-old daughter. The morning was cool and overcast. As they passed a vacant lot on South Norton Avenue, something caught her eye. Lying in the damp grass, just feet from the sidewalk, was what Betty first thought to be a discarded department store mannequin. It was stark white and strangely contorted. Mannequins were often broken or dumped, but something about this one was deeply unsettling. It was posed intentionally. She took a few steps closer. The reality was immediate and horrifying. This was no mannequin. It was the nude, severed body of a woman. Betty quickly shielded her daughter's eyes and rushed them to the nearest house to phone the police. The first Los Angeles Police Department officers to arrive secured a scene of unparalleled brutality. The victim's body was cut in half at the waist with an almost surgical precision. She had been drained of all her blood, giving her skin that pale, doll-like appearance. And most grotesquely, her face had been mutilated with a carved, bloody smile, stretching from ear to ear. The body had been washed clean. There was no blood on the ground. This was not where she was killed. This was where she was left. A gruesome message, deliberately placed in a public space. Reporters and photographers were on the scene within minutes, even before most of the detectives. A storm of flashing camera bulbs descended, and the chaos began. The problem for investigators was simple, but immense. Who was she? There was no purse, no identification, nothing to give her a name. She was a blank slate, a Jane Doe, and the first crucial step in the investigation was to give her a voice to find her identity. It was a race against time and against the headlines that would soon turn a human being into a legend. Welcome back to Voices of Innocent. In the biting cold of a January morning, a discovery was made that would forever leave a scar on the soul of Los Angeles. We left off with the haunting image of a woman's body, discarded and broken in a vacant lot. In Part 2, we delve into the immediate aftermath, the critical first hours of an investigation that would quickly spiral into a media circus, and the desperate search for a ghost-like killer in a city of celluloid dreams and broken promises. The crime scene at 39th and Norton was a study in chaos. Before the area could be properly secured, a swarm of reporters and morbidly curious onlookers descended upon the quiet residential street. They trampled over potential evidence, their footprints obscuring the tracks of the killer, their hungry eyes feasting on the macabre spectacle. The press, with their flashing cameras and scribbled notes, were not just reporting a story. They were shaping it, and in the process, they would both help and hinder the search for justice for Elizabeth Short. Identifying the victim was the first crucial step. The killer had left no personal effects, but he had overlooked one thing: fingerprints. Tragically, Elizabeth's prints were already on file. The FBI was able to quickly identify her, not from an acting portfolio, but from a past arrest for underage drinking and a job application she had filled out at an Army base. She was Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman from Massachusetts, who, like so many others, had been lured to Los Angeles by the siren song of Hollywood fame. She had no acting credits to her name, and her life in the city had been a transient one, a series of rented rooms and short-lived waitressing jobs. The autopsy, performed the day after her body was discovered, revealed the chilling extent of the killer's depravity. Dr. Frederick Newbar, the county coroner, determined that the cause of death was cerebral, hemorrhage and shock from blows to the head and the gruesome lacerations on her face. She had been bound at the wrists and ankles, and her body had been completely drained of blood, a detail that suggested the murder had not taken place in the open lot where she was found. But it was the bisection of her body that truly horrified investigators. A clean, precise cut that hinted at a killer with surgical knowledge, or, at the very least, a terrifyingly steady hand. As the police scrambled to piece together Elizabeth's final days, the city's newspapers, locked in a fierce circulation war, went into a frenzy. It was the press who would posthumously give Elizabeth the moniker that would make her immortal, the Black Dahlia. The nickname was a dark echo of the popular film noir, The Blue Dahlia, and a nod to her rumored preference for black clothing. The press sensationalized every detail of her life, painting a picture of a troubled and promiscuous adventuress who prowled Hollywood Boulevard. It was a narrative that, while it sold papers, did little to help the investigation and further obscured the real woman who had been so brutally taken. Days after the discovery of Elizabeth's body, the killer, emboldened by the media storm, began to taunt the police and the press. A package was sent to the Los Angeles Examiner, its contents a chilling collection of Elizabeth's personal belongings, her birth certificate, social security card, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. Everything in the package had been meticulously cleaned with gasoline, wiping away any potential fingerprints. Soon after, a series of letters, composed of words cut and pasted from newspapers, arrived at various publications. One read, "I will give up on Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. The taunts were a clear sign that the killer was watching, reveling in the chaos he had created. The investigation, the largest in the city's history at the time, was massive, involving hundreds of officers. But they were met with a series of dead ends. Leads went cold, and suspects were questioned and released. Over 150 individuals would be considered persons of interest in the initial investigation, but no arrests were ever made. The city of Los Angeles, once a beacon of hope for Elizabeth Short, had become the backdrop to her unsolved murder, a grim stage for a mystery that would endure for decades. In Part 3 of The Black Dahlia, A Life Erased, we will delve into the sprawling list of suspects, from Hollywood moguls to down-and-out drifters. We will examine the most compelling theories, the tantalizing clues that led nowhere, and the lives that were irrevocably changed by their connection to this infamous case. The search for the Black Dahlia's killer was a journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche, and it is a journey that, for many, has never truly ended. Join us next time as we continue the story. Welcome back to Voices of Innocent. The initial investigation into the murder of Elizabeth Short was a whirlwind of sensational headlines, taunting letters from a faceless killer, and a growing sense of frustration within the Los Angeles Police Department. They had a victim, a name that was now tragically famous, but the perpetrator remained a ghost. In Part 3, we step into the interrogation room, examining the faces of the men who fell under the shadow of suspicion, from the last man to see her alive to a brilliant doctor with a dark secret. This is a journey through a labyrinth of leads, where every path seemed to promise an answer, only to end in darkness. The net cast by the LAPD was enormous, eventually ensnaring hundreds of potential suspects. But a few names rose to the top of their list. The first was Robert "Red" Manley, a married salesman who was the last known person to see Elizabeth alive. He had picked her up in San Diego and driven her to Los Angeles, dropping her off at the Biltmore Hotel on the evening of January 9, 1947, 6 days before her body was found. Manley was subjected to intense questioning and multiple lie detector tests. He maintained his innocence, his story never wavering. With no evidence to hold him, and with his alibi seemingly checking out, the police were forced to release him, though the cloud of suspicion would follow him for the rest of his life. Then there was Mark Hansen. Hansen was a wealthy nightclub and movie theater owner and a known figure in the Hollywood underworld. His name was front and center in the investigation for one chilling reason. It was his address book, a book he had given to Elizabeth, that the killer mailed to the press. Hanson's home was a frequent crash pad for aspiring actresses, and Elizabeth had stayed there briefly with several other young women. Police questioned him extensively. Did Elizabeth know something that could expose him? Was their relationship more than he let on? Like Manley, Hanson had powerful connections and a seemingly solid alibi. The police could never tie him directly to the murder, and another promising lead dissolved into whispers and speculation. As the years turned into decades, the official investigation stalled, but one suspect's name would emerge as the most haunting and compelling of all: Dr. George Hodel. Hodel was a brilliant physician with a high IQ, a taste for surrealist art, and a dark, sinister private life. He was a prominent figure in 1940s Los Angeles, but he was also the primary suspect in a different investigation involving his own daughter, Tamar. In 1949, police planted listening devices in Hodel's home. The recordings were shocking. On them, Hodel could be heard discussing paying off district attorneys and, most damningly, a cryptic and terrifying monologue. Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. Why wasn't he arrested? By the time the LAPD had this tape, their main case against Hodel was falling apart, and the Dahlia investigation itself had grown cold. Hodel, perhaps sensing the walls closing in, abruptly left the country and lived in Asia for the next 40 years. It wasn't until after his death that his son, a former LAPD homicide detective named Steve Hodel, began his own investigation, uncovering a mountain of circumstantial evidence that pointed directly to his father. He found photos in his father's possessions that bore a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short, and he argued that his father's surgical skills perfectly matched the precise and brutal bisection of the victim's body. For many, George Hodel became the man who got away with one of America's most infamous murders. The list went on. From petty criminals to Hollywood celebrities, hundreds of men were questioned. Dozens of people, many of them attention seekers, would falsely confess to the crime over the years, forcing the exhausted investigators to waste precious time chasing phantoms. Every theory, from a love affair gone wrong to a random act of sadistic violence, was explored. Yet every lead ultimately led back to the same frustrating point: a wall of silence. The killer had been meticulous, leaving behind a horrifically staged crime scene, but no fingerprints, no murder weapon, and no credible witnesses. He had vanished back into the sprawling anonymity of the city. The official investigation into the murder of Elizabeth Short never truly closed, but it did go cold, buried under the weight of time and unanswered questions. But a case this haunting does not simply fade away. It lingers in the public consciousness, a testament to a young woman's stolen life and the elusive nature of justice. In our final part, we will explore the enduring legacy of the Black Dahlia, the impact on law enforcement, its permeation into pop culture, and the modern-day efforts that continue to seek the truth, refusing to let the killer have the final word. Join us next time as we conclude our look back at a life erased. Welcome back to Voices of Innocent. We have walked the cold streets of 1940s Los Angeles, stood at a horrific crime scene, and sifted through a mountain of suspects in a case that grew colder with each passing year. No arrests were ever made. No one was ever charged with the murder of Elizabeth Short. In this final part, we explore the aftermath of that failure. We look not for the killer, but for the ghost he left behind, a ghost that would haunt law. Enforcement inspire storytellers and embed itself into the very fabric of American true crime lore, forever asking the question: who killed the Black Dahlia? The Black Dahlia case became more than a murder. It became a myth. It stands as one of the Los Angeles Police Department's most significant and public failures, a sprawling investigation that ultimately buckled under the weight of media, sensationalism, false leads, and a killer who was either incredibly careful or incredibly lucky. For the city of Los Angeles, it was a dark turning point, a brutal loss of innocence. The case exposed the seedy, violent underbelly beneath the glamorous facade of Hollywood, becoming a cautionary tale whispered among the thousands of other young women who arrived in the city with stars in their eyes. The story proved irresistible to a generation of writers and filmmakers who saw in it the ultimate embodiment of film noir. It had all the elements: a beautiful, enigmatic victim, a corrupt city, and a mystery with no neat and tidy conclusion. The most influential retelling came from author James Ellroy, whose 1987 novel, The Black Dahlia, captivated a new audience. The novel, and the films and television shows it inspired, cemented Elizabeth Short's status in popular culture. But in doing so, they also transformed a real person into a fictional archetype: the doomed femme fatale, the ultimate noir victim. The nuances of the real Elizabeth, the woman who loved to dance, who wrote letters home, who dreamed of a life she would never have, were often buried beneath the legend. But the search for truth did not die with the original investigators. In the decades that followed, countless amateur sleuths, authors, and retired lawmen have tried to crack the case. No one has been more relentless than Steve Hodel, the former LAPD detective we mentioned in Part 3. His investigation into his own father, Dr. George Hodel, has produced a trove of compelling, if circumstantial, evidence. Steve connected his father's medical training to the killer's surgical precision, linked him to the crime scene through soil analysis, and even had handwriting experts assert that it was his father who penned some of the killer as taunted notes. In his father's photo album, he discovered portraits of a dark-haired woman he believes to be Elizabeth Short, haunting images taken just before she was killed. Though his findings will never be tested in a court of law, Steve Hodel's work presents the most complete and widely accepted theory to date. And so, the story of the Black Dahlia ends where it began, in a vacant lot with a question that officially can never be answered. The killer, whether it was a disturbed doctor, a spurned lover, or a complete stranger, took his secrets to the grave. He was never punished for his crime. He won. All that is left is the endless speculation and the chilling reality of what was lost. Beyond the gory headlines, the noir legend, and the chilling photographs, we must remember Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman who came to the City of Angels searching for a dream, only to find a nightmare. Her killer may have erased her life, but he could not erase her name. It lives on, a symbol of a promise unfulfilled and of a justice that was never found. A silent voice in the heart of a city that never forgets. Thank you for listening to Voices of Innocent.